Fascinating discussion, David. Thanks again. So today's theme again is pivot. And as most everyone in the room knows, to stay competitive in today's economy, dynamic businesses must also be agile and remain viable and relevant. So to explore how remaining agile can impact our region and its business community, please welcome CenterState CEO President Rob Simpson.
Good afternoon. And to Chairman Jim Fox, I just want to say a personal thank you for the time and energy and insight that you have invested in our mission and in this organization and in me personally. It means a great deal, and I appreciate it. To our members and our directors, thank you for the confidence that you place in us every single day to navigate this ever-changing economic and civic landscape with the goal of creating a place where business thrives and people prosper. And to our entire staff at CenterState CEO, I'm going to embarrass you for a moment and ask that every single one of you please stand. Just last night, CenterState CEO was recognized as one of the best companies to work for in New York State in an awards celebration in Albany. Now, recognition like that is not an individual award. We all know that culture is a team sport. And each and every one of you contribute to that culture of service and success by going above and beyond for our members and for this region. I am immensely proud to be your colleague, and I thank you for making CenterState CEO such a great place to work. To my wife, Corinne, true story, 22 years ago, we were driving back from our very first date, and I was so engrossed in this intense conversation that I forgot to slow down entering a turn. I spun the car around 360 degrees before coming to stop on the opposite shoulder of the road. Before cell phones, this was the original distracted driving, and here we are 22 years later, and you are still the center of my attention. Thank you. Let's pivot for a second. In 1912, an industrial soap and cleaner company was founded in Cincinnati, Ohio. By the 1930s, their premier product was an industrial wallpaper cleaner used to collect soot and dust from coal-fired furnaces. By the 1950s, oil and gas furnaces gained popularity and demand for this product tanked. Yet just as their primary market was collapsing, the Cut-All Products Company began to take off. It turns out that the tacky, clay-like cleaner had another use, and a far bigger and more sustainable market to serve: kids. 70 years later, more than 2 billion cans of Play-Doh have been distributed worldwide. Now, closer to home, Ascension Web Design was founded by two Central New York entrepreneurs in 1998 to create web pages for customers. By 2002, the company was recast as Ascension Gaming Network, focusing on creating magazines and content for competitive gaming card players. And when advertisers stopped spending money with the magazine, Chetty Hempson pivoted again and launched TCGplayer.com in 2008. That online platform was responsible for 35 million transactions right here from Syracuse, New York in 2017. Not only has TCGplayer.com become a dominant force in its market, but it is literally infusing our downtown with new employees, new energy, and a brand new corporate headquarters. Now, the day after we announced the theme for this year's annual meeting, I received a friendly missive from one of our members. Their suggestion was that the theme, pivot, was overplayed. It was nothing more at this point than business school pablum. Now, I thought that was a little harsh, but I did my homework. And it turns out that there are workbooks for determining when to pivot and what to pivot to. There's even an amazing subculture of people who literally have the time and the energy to debate whether or not pivoting is in fact brilliant jujitsu, where you use the force of your opponent against them to accomplish your goals, or the ultimate act of submission and failure, admitting that the strategy you use one day is no longer valid, and therefore you were wrong to choose it in the first place. But amidst it all, and at the heart of David Lee's message, there is a fundamental lesson for people, businesses, and communities. Markets change, customer needs evolve, and we ignore these signals at our own peril. David's message today to us is a fundamentally hopeful and optimistic one. Yes, it's an eye-opening reminder of the rapid pace of technological advance and the profound impact that those changes will force on people and business and society. But it's also a potent reminder of the perseverance of the human spirit and the ability to anticipate, identify, and react proactively to these changes in our world. Now, I have this very vivid memory from my childhood. I'm with my father on a beach in Brittany, France. We were visiting the family that my mother had stayed with when she was an exchange student 20 years before. Now, the bay beneath those cliffs had one of those long, gently sloping beaches where the ocean literally could recede for miles, which made it perfect for exploring at low tide. And we had been digging for, I don't know how long, for a long time, before my father began to tell me the story about the last time he had been on that beach, when he was visiting my mother as a student 20 years before, about how he had gone out to do the exact same thing we were doing right now, and how he had gotten distracted by the discoveries around him, about how he'd taken his eye off of the horizon, and how quite suddenly and forcefully the tide had come back in. Now, I don't remember how far out we were in the bay. What I remember is that immediately the world felt very small. Those waves off in the distance felt incredibly close. And I panicked. And my father, I can remember this, I closed my eyes, literally put his hands on my shoulders to calm me. I remember looking back up to him through anxious and uneasy eyes. And he said to me, "Do you know what I did when that happened?" And I nervously shook my head. And then he tagged me and he said, "I ran," before leading me on a foot race back to the beach. You see, it's only when we stand rigidly in the face of change that we place ourselves at the mercy of those forces. Unable to move, unable to hold back that rushing tide, we're simply overrun. Instead, when we preserve our ability to be agile and to pivot, we have the ability to use those forces around us to move us forward. Now, it's one thing to recognize that some change and adaptation is needed. That's mostly common sense. But the how is always trickier. And amidst the volumes of literature on the topic, there is one lesson that resonated with me most profoundly, and that I think has the most applicability to our present circumstance in Central New York. The most successful companies and communities have figured out how to be problem-focused, not product-focused. In other words, they've learned that growth is not predicated on what you have to sell, but rather on the customer or community need you're trying to solve. Now, people sometimes ask me why we can't be more like a traditional economic development organization, or why we can't act more like a traditional chamber of commerce. And the honest answer is, those roles have been automated. The work of a site selector looking to understand the economic and demographic makeup of a community can be done with a laptop and an internet connection, making Google the most powerful economic development organization in the world. And for those looking to market their business or network with their peers, LinkedIn offers a faster, more targeted chamber mixer without having to leave the office or miss a dinner at home with the kids. That's not to say that human contact, as you heard David Lee say, isn't important. Of course it is. But it reminds me of an anecdote that we heard David share about the business card. The people are given 3 words on this business card, and they are asked to be just that, when the reality is we all have the ability to be so much more. And even organizations like CenterState CEO need to be so much more if we're going to survive and thrive in this rapidly evolving landscape. Now, today, I see so much of this powerful lesson in the work that we do at CenterState CEO. When our economic growth doesn't measure up to the national average, it's tempting to fall back on the traditional playbook and invest more money in marketing or attend more trade shows to generate more leads. But all of the data and economic research tells us that only 2% of economic growth in all metropolitan areas across the US come from business attraction efforts. We can try to swim up that stream all we want, or we can pivot and invest our time and our energy and our resources where the statistics and the facts show us we have the greatest opportunity for economic return. And if you look at the most successful economic development announcements of the last several years, the smart choice is obvious. SRC announces it plans to add 1,000 jobs over the next 5 years, in part due to the opportunities in the field of unmanned systems and responding to opportunities in markets across the globe. Saab doesn't just announce 260 new jobs in Syracuse and Central New York, but they put an exclamation point on that announcement by making Syracuse their North American headquarters. Or Hillrom. They announced instead of taking jobs out of Skinny Atlas after acquiring Welsh Allyn, that they would invest locally, creating 100,000 new square feet of manufacturing and office space and adding 110 new jobs. Or consider for a second our region's efforts to position itself at the forefront of research for drones and unmanned systems. These efforts didn't take root because we had a ready-made product to sell the world. They took root because we developed a roadmap and a resource pool that is helping to solve the critical problem that regulators and industry face: how to safely integrate drones into the commercial airspace. And now New Air and our partners in Utica, Rome, are aligning this multi-dimensional Rubik's Cube that involves technology, innovation, standards and certification, and public policy to unlock $1 trillion industry, which makes our efforts here in this region extremely valuable and very attractive to potential partners. Or take the Tech Garden, which opened its doors more than 12 years ago, offering discounted space and some shared amenities to early stage startups. Over the years, as our startup ecosystem has evolved, we've had to evolve too. No longer just a physical space for companies to collide, the Tech Garden is now the hub of a rapidly evolving technology ecosystem built on the simple premise that we must add value to these customers and these clients at every stage of their evolution, from ideation to acceleration, from incubation to expansion. By being agile and focused on adding value, the Tech Garden has grown from a home to a dozen small companies a decade ago to more than 35 today. Our programming reaches more than 100 startups a year across upstate New York, and our alumni represent some of the fastest growing and most visible technology success stories in the region, from Ephesus Technologies, SpinCar, and TCGplayer.com, each of which has chosen to remain in downtown Syracuse as they populate an organically emerging innovation district along the once defunct Warren Street corridor. And all the while, we've been putting our money where our mouth is, investing nearly $9 million in more than 40 companies over the last 8 years, making CenterState CEO the largest angel investor in Central New York and one of the largest in all of upstate. But there is perhaps no greater example of the need for this organization and our business leadership, all of you, to be problem-focused than the considerable racial and socioeconomic disparities facing our community. Think quietly to yourself for a second. When you hear that 32% of the residents that live in the city of Syracuse live at or below the poverty line, what image comes to mind? Or when I remind you that 50% of those under the age of 18 also live in poverty, what does that make you feel inside? Now, in June of 1947, a newly confirmed Secretary of State delivered an address to more than 15,000 people in Harvard Yard, who had lived for more than a decade with the drumbeat of the Second World War. It was only when the peace had been won that the eyes of the world came to rest for the first time on the great socioeconomic disaster that had engulfed Europe. His name was George C. Marshall. The problem is one of such enormous complexity, he began, that the very mass of facts presented to the public make it exceedingly difficult to reach a clear appraisement of the situation. Furthermore, the people of this country are distant from the troubled areas of the earth, and it is hard for them to comprehend the plight and the consequent reactions of long-suffering peoples. But comprehend we must. How else can we possibly remove this shadow for our future if we can't even confront and accept the specter of our past? 32% of our city is 45,880 people. 50% of our children is 10,108 kids. And while poverty is an economic condition that requires economic solutions, these statistics hide a darker reality about race and opportunity that we cannot ignore. According to a recently completed 5-year plan for the South Side prepared by APD Solutions, in the city of Syracuse, Caucasians represent 56% of the population, but hold 85% of the jobs. African Americans, on the other hand, account for 30% of the population and just 10% of the jobs. And Latinos represent 8% of the population and only 3.4% of the jobs. These are not conditions on the ground in some foreign country across an ocean. They are present circumstance among our neighbors, and without a multifaceted and intentional effort by every sector of our community, this problem will only get worse. As David Lee pointed out, today's workplaces are increasingly complex, and that pace of change is increasing exponentially. Yet even today, only 6% of the jobs in Syracuse are attainable to someone with less than a high school education, and a full 46% of the jobs require a college degree or more. But only 9% of the African American population in the city and only 12% in the county has a bachelor's degree or higher. Now, in full disclosure, I live in the city, and I believe unequivocally that cities are the engines for modern economies. But what I say next comes not from a position of bias, I hope, but from pure, simple pragmatism. Our society cannot sustain itself with this level of social, economic, and fiscal imbalance. Our city and some of our inner ring suburbs are where the greatest inequities and imbalances persist. There is no off-the-shelf solution for this multidimensional scourge. This is the choice we face. Shall we stand rigidly in this path and do nothing? Shall we be overrun? Or might we turn our full attention and all of our resources and all of our humanity to the problems at hand and confront them together by matching their scale and intensity? This is why we are calling on our elected leaders and our business leaders, and yes, that means those of you in this room, to bring investment and jobs to the doorstep of the city and to our neighborhoods themselves, because it is not sufficient to promise to bring people to jobs via an underfunded public transportation system. Instead, we must do more to bring jobs to the people who need them the most. It's why we launched WorkTrain, to engage with you, our employers, in placing more than 500 un- and underemployed residents in good jobs with career pathways in construction, healthcare, and manufacturing. It's why we launched Upstart, to target our expertise with new business creation on the needs of our most vulnerable communities, supporting 17 new neighborhood-based businesses last year with a goal of serving more than 100 in 2018. It's why we choose to partner with the Upstate Minority Economic Alliance to unlock and to reach the economic potential of those 10,000 minority businesses in our region. It's why we're partnering with the Allen Foundation to lead a community prosperity initiative that seeks to replicate recent neighborhood revitalization efforts on the north side and the near west side in other parts of our city and our region that have been left behind. And it's why we are proud to partner with the Syracuse City School District on groundbreaking initiatives such as the development of the first ever high school career and technical education program for drones in the entire United States. Because opportunity begins with education and the development of the ability to problem solve. Now, with my son Ben in kindergarten now, that has never been more apparent to me. He is thriving in school, learning new things every day, full of curiosity and confidence. And with the opening of the new climbing gym in Franklin Square, we now have a new favorite activity. We climb there together 3 or 4 times a week. It's fascinating. A gym full of adults climbing walls that are 16, 22, and even 45 feet high. They have decades of experience testing and building confidence in their own limitations. And then there's Ben, turned 6 just yesterday, sizing up a new route. When he finds one he wants to try, he jumps on the wall, picks his way up 3 or 4 holds, and then jumps off. Sometimes he'll put chalk on his hands, jumps back on the wall, and climbs until he finds a move that perplexes him, that stops him before he climbs back down. And then he will literally sit at the base of that wall and stare at it for a long time. Sometimes he'll ask a question, sometimes not, until he finds the solution. What's the best place to put my hands? Where do I put my feet for maximum reach and flexibility? And then he'll go back to that wall and he'll work that one move until he gets all the way to the top. The world that Ben and other children are growing up in will require tremendous agility. So as parents, what more can we do than let him watch other people climb to the top every single day? He sees them do it, so he knows it's not a question of if he can do it, but how. It's just another problem for him to solve. Which brings us to one of the most important problems that we have to solve, and a defining moment for generations to come: Interstate 81. Let's look for a moment at the issues and opportunities we're trying to resolve and exploit. A horribly unwelcoming overpass, a physical barrier between the hill and downtown, a high-speed highway that's reached the end of its useful life, dramatic underutilization of what could and should be the most valuable tax-producing property in our entire region in a city that desperately needs the revenue to survive. Concerns about truck traffic diverting through towns and villages to the west. Economic concerns in the town of Salina. Noise and traffic and quality of life issues in DeWitt. The potential loss of visibility for Destiny. The disruption that even the shortest and least intrusive construction schedule will invariably create. An opportunity to transform the south side of the city of Syracuse by partnering with the Syracuse Housing Authority to rethink, redevelop, and improve so much of our public housing. A chance to redevelop an entire corridor stretching through our city with an inclusive approach to development that reflects our values and our aspirations. To build mixed income, mixed use, and pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods that will appeal to the changing demographics of America and let us capitalize on the wave of re-urbanization that is sweeping this country and the world. Now, does anyone really believe that any highway solution, a community grid, a new viaduct, a tunnel, will truly and adequately address each and every one of these concerns and opportunities that have surfaced in this decades-long debate? Of course it won't. Which is why, as we approach the moment of decision, we must expand our conversation beyond the roadway to the true and fundamental issues at stake. We're never going to find consensus on which solution is preferred. I don't know of a single infrastructure project anywhere in this country of this scale where there isn't debate, disagreement, and even diametrically opposed viewpoints. But it is time for this community to decide, because inaction in the face of opportunity is not a legacy that we can afford. So instead of digging our heels into more deeply entrenched positions, here are two problem statements that we might consider trying to solve together. First, the future of mobility, just like the future of robotics and artificial intelligence at the heart of David Lee's talk, is changing at a breakneck pace. And our decision must be future-focused. Two, the solution that is chosen, no matter what it is, will have both positive and adverse impacts on certain people, businesses, and communities. By focusing on these problems instead of just the limited menu of traditional transportation options that we've been offered, we have the opportunity to enable a more meaningful reflection on what our entire region really needs to thrive for generations to come. An effective solution requires a more robust public transportation system to accompany it. A visionary solution would include a redevelopment commission to maximize the aesthetic, social, and economic value of the land around it. And a fair and comprehensive solution would involve a strategic investment fund to attend to the concerns of those who are disaffected in the same way that our governments provide adjustment assistance for those businesses and workers that are impacted by foreign trade. And while we may continue to disagree long after a decision is made, we should not fail the basic test of leadership and decency: to show compassion for each other's perspectives and opinions. For how we make this decision may in fact prove to have as lasting a legacy as what we decide. Now, for those of you who know me, you know this to be true. I have tremendous faith in this community. We will always face challenges, and the world around us, our environment, technology, economic and demographic forces, will never stop trying to overrun us. This is our problem to own, to manage with agility, to lead through, over, and around. I do not fear the future David Lee describes. I welcome it, and I believe unequivocally that we shall use these forces to move this community forward. Thank you so much for your partnership and your leadership. Have a great afternoon, everyone.